Well, it has been simmering for weeks now, and today was certainly the boiling point. Hosni Mubarak finally talked tonight, as we showed you before. He says he's not going to step down. Protesters out there, that has enraged them. Ahmed Abdelal has lived in Egypt for 26 years. You are now?
I'm provost at the University of Massachusetts at Lowell.
And give me your reaction to today.
Well, at first I found the speech confusing. And so he spent a long time, and the critical words were really done in 30, 40 seconds.
We were waiting. We said, are you going to stay or are you going to go?
But the way I heard the words, I heard him say that I'm transferring the powers of the presidency to the vice president, which obviously means I'm not, I interpreted that to mean I'm not president anymore. But he said it in such a way that I'm not surprised. Here I was sitting quietly in my office listening to his speech, and I just barely got what he said, and I believe I understood him correctly. I can imagine people listening to this in a crowd and with noise and trying to figure out what he said. What did he say?
Are you surprised that the protesters are upset? Because basically, he did transfer his powers, said that he would, whether it's some or all of it. But the truth is, giving the power to the vice president, a lot of these protesters are saying, is the exact same thing as having him in there.
Yeah, I think that is true, but I think what the demonstrators also need to figure out, what do they want to happen? So obviously everybody wants democracy, and I personally think that's absolutely what needs to happen. And I think our administration also wants that. But the question is, how do you get there? So I think the idea of him transferring power to the vice president really came out of the Obama administration a number of days ago. But of course, Mubarak has been always a week or 10 days late, you know. So by the time he says it, he also doesn't say it clearly. So I'm not surprised that the demonstrators would be upset, because most likely they couldn't figure out what he said.
What's going to happen next now? Because they're expecting massive protests tomorrow. Massive.
Yeah, I really, obviously, it's difficult to know what's going to happen, because I'm not sure how many people understood what he said and how they're going to interpret it.
Well, let me ask you this. Is Hosni Mubarak the president of Egypt?
The way I interpret him, no. Because he really, I like what the Egyptian ambassador said, which is said, the vice president now is the de facto president.
The de facto president.
But Mubarak wasn't going to say that. Part of his problem is his pride, and his pride and his history, and he doesn't seem to just be able to get with it and say to people clearly. Instead, he just always wants to put this long, detailed historical perspective that justifies for history, you know, his own role.
Right.
And that's not helpful. You know, and so there hasn't been really one straightforward statement.
And then you see all the unrest, and that's
absolutely.
the issue.
And then there's the reporters also who are trying. If I had a hard time understanding him, and I'm listening to him directly, and I understand the language,
right? I
can imagine if this is being translated. And I think in many ways the demonstrators are hearing what the reporters are saying. Because they can't just say, okay, repeat that again, you know.
Right. What did you think about what he said? I don't want any foreign interference here.
I think obviously he's playing to the crowd there. I don't want any foreign interference.
Do you think he was taking a hit at the United States?
I expect, well, both the United States and Europe have braced him. And so I didn't like that. He's playing, you know, it's really obviously trying to present himself. I am the Egyptian patriot here. And so I'm not going to respond to outside powers. But in fact, what he just announced was responding, his way to respond to what the demonstrators are saying, but not clearly, and really responding to what our own administration here suggested to him almost a week ago. But again, he didn't respond with clarity. If he actually gave a speech that were just 2 minutes and straightforward,
and said what exactly it was he was going to do.
What would happen, yeah. But instead it all gets in, and so that makes it difficult, and it actually makes it risky. When you ask what's going to happen next, when you have confusion, and when you have people having a hard time figuring out, well, what did he say, and what is happening?
That could lead to violence.
It obviously can lead to that. And so what I personally hope will happen overnight is actually that there will be more clarity about what actually happened.
The vice president came out and said, told the protesters, go home.
Well, that's not helpful, obviously.
Go home.
Unhelpful, as they say in diplomatic language. This was unhelpful for him to say that. It is really, I think, the big challenge is you have a regime that has been in power for 30 years. And maybe in the first 10, they are connected and they understand what is happening in the country and what people are thinking. But then you probably have 15, 20 years living in a bubble where you don't really know what people are saying or thinking. And what the vice president said was just not smart to say. Maybe he could have said something different that would... So it's really a problem of communication. I think neither Mubarak nor his vice president are very effective.
What do you think?
Even in their own interest in communicating, when they do something that could be good, they don't present it well.
What do you think Hosni Mubarak should be doing right now?
I think actually what he has done is the right thing to do.
You do?
Yeah, because the question is, how do you get to democracy? So there has been no democratic process in the country for 30 years, if not longer. And so there is no political parties. There is only one political party and some very small parties that don't really have popular support. So between now and September, the democratization process would have to include people who are running, articulating platforms, and explaining what do they want to do and accomplish to the people. So that 6 months from now, when there is an elections, when people go to vote, they're actually voting for a specific party with a platform. But that is going to, obviously, you have to figure out how to get there from where we are now.
Right.
And so if he just simply resigned and didn't transfer the power to anybody, well, I'm not sure how could that work. You actually have to have somebody in charge.
But why are the protesters, why are they in the hundreds of thousands saying, get him out?
I think that I understand that because he has resisted the will of the people, really, and hasn't been able to communicate, yes, I am following what you are saying.
Right.
And this is the best way to follow it. Then at least people would understand that he listened. And instead, he comes out and gives this long speech, which is trying to justify his own record. Well, that doesn't go over well. And then when he actually says what he wants to do or is going to do, nobody understands what he said. Very few people do. So it's a huge communication gap here. But when you think about it, the Constitution of Egypt says that if the president leaves power without transferring it to somebody,
right,
then the person who becomes a president is head of the parliament. So if you follow the Constitution and Mubarak simply leaves power, then the head of the parliament.
So that's why he transferred it over to the vice president.
Because actually we, the Obama administration, on our behalf, have been suggesting that. Transfer to the vice president, that would be orderly. And this may be the better solution than simply transferring it to the head of the parliament, who's also part of the regime. So really all the options. So what are your options here? The options are transfer his power to the vice president.
Right. Just step down and do nothing.
Step down and do nothing.
Parliament
then the parliament head, who is his own person also, would become president. So he would have the same problem of Omar Suleiman. But maybe he might communicate more effectively.
With the vice president?
No, with people. Than Omar Suleiman seemed to be able to communicate. Communication is very important, as you know.
Yes, I do.
Yeah. And so that could be a better option just because the guy is used to talking to people all the time, the head of the parliament. But your options are either the vice president in charge, or the head of the parliament in charge, or the army is in charge. Well, I don't really like the third option because I don't think it's a good idea to have a military regime, regardless of how much you honor the military.
Right.
You know, it's still, I think, to move back from semi-civilian to direct military, I don't think that's a great option.
Go ahead.
So while people respect the military, But I'm not sure in the end that actually they're going to be excited about that either. So really the challenge is that what would have been helpful is for somebody who can actually say, here is our options. Which one of the three of these do you want?
Right.
Or if you have a fourth option that we can think of, tell us what it is.
How about the fact that there were people out there all day long really believing? I heard people interviewed on the BBC saying, this is it, we're stepping down, we won, we got what we wanted. And they didn't get what they wanted at all.
Well, I think it is the confusion of communication. He obviously knew what he was going to do, or we hope he did, you know. But then they conveyed that he's going to say he's stepping out. But it turned out that stepping out meant that I'm transferring the powers of the presidency. But then it took a while to figure out that that's actually what he said. You know, it took me a while to figure it out. I had to listen to it again. And then when other people were commenting on it, then I heard it one more time.
Right.
Then it was actually clear to me. You know. And so that's really a challenge of communication. And people appropriately want to have clarity.
Right.
What is it you are saying, you know? And he hasn't managed to do this really since the uprising started, which is part of being in a bubble. You know, he has been in this bubble now for probably 15, 20 years. And just still thinking that people are looking up to him the way they did when he at first assumed power, when Sadat was assassinated, which was a very different time, and people were actually grateful for him for taking that and leading the country forward.
And things have turned.
Yeah, and so that went well, actually. But then the problem, as always the case, when somebody stays in power too long and there is no check on the absolute authority, then you start living in this bubble. And then the only way to get out of the bubble is through demonstrations and uprising and so forth.
And that's what we've seen.
Yeah.
All right, Ahmed Abdelal, you are the provost for UMass Lowell. Thank you so much for your insight. We truly
Well, you're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.